I dedicated 4 years of my life to paying my parents' mortgage over $130,000 in total, just to keep the house I grew up in from being taken away. They always said, one day, this will be yours. Then, at my sister's wedding, in front of 100 guests and a live band, they handed her the keys as a gift. Hi, I'm Ava Martinez, 27, a marketing specialist living in Austin, Texas. For years, I believed that being the dependable daughter would eventually mean something. That loyalty, sacrifice, and silence would be rewarded. But everything changed the moment they gave away my future with a smile and applause like I was never even in the picture. Before we dive in, let me know where you're watching from. Drop your city in the comments. Hit like and subscribe if you've ever felt overlooked or taken for granted by the people you trusted most, because this story might just help you find the words to finally say no more. The moment they handed over the house, something in me snapped. I didn't cry. I didn't make a scene. I just sat there, holding my champagne glass, smiling like nothing was wrong because that's what the strong one does. Right. But that night, as I drove home, I kept seeing every dollar I had sent them replay like a movie, the bank transfers made late at night, the skipped vacations, the second job I picked up during the pandemic just to make sure their mortgage never went unpaid. 4 years. 4 years of quietly carrying the weight because they said, this house will be yours someday. And suddenly, it wasn't. What hurt most wasn't the house. It was realizing I had never really been the daughter they chose to protect. And what came next? Let's just say, I wasn't going to stay silent anymore. The next morning, I drove back to my parents' house not as their daughter, but as someone desperate for answers. The porch light was still on. The banner from the wedding was half torn, flapping in the wind like it knew something was wrong too. Inside, my mom was arranging flowers in the kitchen like nothing had happened. You're up early, she said, not even looking up. I wanted to scream, but instead I sat down and asked, why didn't you tell me? She paused, just for a second, then kept arranging. It was your father's idea, she said, and Isla needs stability more than you do. That sentence hit me harder than the night before. I looked around at the dining table I paid to refinish, the curtains I bought, the fridge I stocked. Everything in this house had my fingerprints, except their loyalty. And that was the moment I knew it was time to stop being quiet. That night, I sat in my apartment surrounded by silence. No TV. No music, just the humming of my fridge and a stack of old receipts on the table. I pulled up my bank app and started scrolling back, month by month. 4 years of payments, rent transfers, grocery runs, medical bills. I added it all up, 132, 450, 64, and not a single contract, not a single written promise. Just, we'll make sure this house is yours someday. My chest tightened, not from anger, but from shame. How had I let this go on so long? How had I convinced myself that loyalty would be enough? I opened a blank spreadsheet and titled it, What I Gave Up. Not for them, for me. I needed to see it. But the next morning, something happened that changed everything again. The next morning, I got a text from Dad. Can we talk over dinner tonight? No apology, no context. Just a dinner invite like nothing had happened. I said yes. When I showed up, the house looked different. My old photos had been taken down. New paint. A modern dining set where our worn oak table used to be. And Isla glowing, laughing, at the center of it all. Dinner was quiet, tense. Dad kept glancing at me. Mom passed the salad like we weren't unraveling. Then Isla said it. Casually, like a joke. Well, at least the house is finally being used right. I almost dropped my fork. I looked at my parents, neither said a word. That was the moment I realized they never planned on giving it back. But what I discovered after that, it made everything even worse. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying Isla's words finally being used, right, like a slap echoing through my mind. So I did what I hadn't done in months. I went through every receipt statement, every email between me and my parents. At 2 a.m., I found it buried in an old inbox. A message from my mom's real estate agent, CC'd by accident months ago. The subject line read, "Title transfer complete. New deed for Isla Martinez." I froze. They hadn't just gifted her the house at the wedding. They'd signed it over weeks earlier. Before I ever got that last call for $2,000 roof repairs, they took my money, knowing full well the house was no longer mine to fight for. But what broke me wasn't just the betrayal, it was who else had known before me. The next day, I ran into one of Isla's bridesmaids at the grocery store, someone I barely knew. She smiled and said, "Wasn't it sweet of your parents to give Isla the house before the wedding? I heard it was all signed weeks ago." I nodded, but my hands were trembling on the shopping cart handle. So it wasn't just my family. Everyone knew. Everyone but me. I drove home in silence, passed by the house I used to help pay for. The porch light was off. A brand new welcome mat read, "The Martinezes." Not Ava Martinez, just Isla and Jaden. Back in my apartment, I stood in front of the mirror, clutching the last bank transfer receipt like it was proof I still mattered. But in that moment, I realized something brutal they never intended to include me, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't going to take it quietly. I sat at my laptop and reopened the spreadsheet, the one I named What I Gave Up. I added a new line trust. I scrolled down past the numbers, the transactions, the photos of the house, and typed in bold, "They never chose me." That sentence sat there on the screen, heavier than any dollar amount. Then, for the first time in years, I opened a new document. This one wasn't for them. It was for me. I started drafting a letter, not emotional, not angry, just facts. Every payment, every promise, every moment I was told someday. It wasn't revenge I wanted. It was acknowledgement, boundaries, my voice. And the next step, I was going to deliver that letter in person. I printed the letter, folded it neatly, and drove back to the house. My hands didn't shake this time. When Mom opened the door, I didn't ask to come in. I handed her the envelope and said, "This outlines every dollar I sent, every promise made. I'm not angry. I just need closure." She took it wordlessly, her lips pressed into a tight line. Dad hovered behind her. Unreadable. For a moment, I thought she might say something, an apology, a sigh, anything. Instead, she looked me in the eye and said, "You're making this more complicated than it needs to be." That sentence stung more than silence ever could. I turned and walked away. Not because I was defeated, but because I finally understood I couldn't fix people who didn't think they'd broken anything. But I wasn't done. Not yet. That night, I blocked my parents' number for the first time in my life. No more late-night texts asking for a small loan. No more guilt trips. No more pretending we were still a family that listened. The next morning, I logged into my bank app and removed their account as an authorized recipient. It took 2 seconds, but it felt like closing a chapter I'd kept open too long. That same afternoon, Dad showed up at my apartment unannounced, holding a box of pastries like peace offerings. I didn't open the door. I watched him through the peephole as he stood there, checked his phone, and left a message I never listened to. Because I knew what came next, the guilt parade, the passive-aggressive voicemails, the blame shifting. But this time, I wasn't shrinking. I was preparing for the first real boundary I'd ever set and the pushback I knew was coming. The next morning, I found them sitting outside my building, Mom in her Sunday sweater, Dad holding that same pastry box, now slightly crushed. They didn't knock. They just waited. When I opened the door, Mom stood up and said, "We think you're overreacting. This isn't how families treat each other." I almost laughed. Exactly. I said. "This isn't how families treat each other. So why did Dad try to hand me the box? I didn't take it. I just want some space." I told them. No money. No calls. No visits. Mom's face dropped. Her voice was sharper now. "Well, if that's how you want it, then don't expect to come back when things fall apart." I closed the door, and for the first time in my life, it felt like I wasn't their daughter anymore. The silence after that door closed was loud. No more calls, no knocks, just nothing. For a while, it hurt deeper than I expected. I wasn't just cut off from them. I had erased myself from the only role I ever knew: the responsible daughter, the fixer, the provider. I started eating dinners alone again. I'd glance at my phone, half expecting a message, but there were none. Until one day, I got a Venmo request from Dad. $600. The note said gas plus Isla's birthday. I stared at it, then laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was so perfectly them. That's when I realized they weren't going to stop. So I started planning something they'd never expect, something I should have done years ago. I wasn't just going to let this pass. If they could hand over my childhood home like a party favor, I could reclaim what was mine, even if not legally, then emotionally. I started digging through old emails, texts, even group chat screenshots. I compiled every message that included phrases like, "We'll put your name on the title soon," and "You're building your future here." Some of it was vague, but some very clear. Then I found it an old email chain between Mom and their attorney. The subject: deed agreement, Ava's co-signing status. It was dated during year 2 of my payments. They had discussed making me co-owner and chose not to tell me. My hands tightened around the mouse. I wasn't going to sue them, not yet. But I had something better: the truth. And I was about to show the entire family exactly what that looked like. It was Isla's birthday, the perfect stage. The whole family would be there. So I went. I showed up calm, holding nothing but a slim binder. Isla greeted me awkwardly, clearly not expecting me after weeks of silence. Mom and Dad gave polite, tight-lipped smiles. After the cake, I stood and said, "I have something I'd like to share." I pulled out the binder and flipped it open. This is a record of every payment I made toward the house, every message, every promise. And this, I held up the printed email, proves you knew it wouldn't be mine long before you told me. The room froze. Aunt Lydia dropped her fork. Isla's husband shifted uncomfortably. My parents didn't speak, but it was Isla who broke the silence. And what she said next shocked everyone, including me. Isla stood slowly, her face pale. "I didn't know," she said, voice trembling. "They told me you offered it, that you didn't want the house." My heart clenched. Why would I give away something I was still paying for? I asked. She looked at our parents. "You told me she was done with it, that she moved on." No one said a word. Around us, forks rested on plates, conversations frozen mid-sentence. Aunt Lydia covered her mouth. Even Jaden shifted in his seat, clearly blindsided. "I'm sorry," Isla whispered. "If I'd known, I never would have accepted it." It wasn't the apology I expected, but it was more than I'd gotten from anyone else in that room. And for the first time in months, something inside me softened. But forgiveness wasn't going to be that easy. I didn't expect tears from Isla, but they came. Right there, in front of our entire family. She cried, not dramatic, just quiet and real. "I thought you didn't care," she said, voice cracking. "I thought you'd moved on. I didn't know they lied to both of us." Something inside me shifted. The betrayal still burned, but now it had layers. It wasn't just about me anymore. They'd manipulated all of us, played favorites, twisted truths, left silence where there should have been clarity. "I'm giving it back," Isla whispered. You deserve it more than I ever did. Gasps rippled through the room. Dad stood up sharply. That's not your decision to make, he barked. And just like that, the mask slipped. For years, I thought I was just the overlooked daughter, but that moment proved it. I was a threat they never saw coming. Dad's voice cut through the tension like a blade. You're trying to tear this family apart, he hissed. Over a house. I took a deep breath, steadying my voice. I'm not tearing anything apart. I'm just not pretending anymore. Isla looked between us, torn. It's not just a house, she whispered. It's everything she gave and everything we took. The room pulsed with silence. I could feel everyone watching, waiting to see who would flinch. I'm not asking for pity, I continued. I'm asking for truth, accountability, that's all. Dad stepped forward. Then let's talk truth, he said. You were never meant to inherit anything. You were just helping out. His words hit harder than I expected, not because they were shocking, but because, deep down, I had feared exactly that. And now, he had said it out loud. His words rang out like a verdict. You were just helping out. Everyone went silent. I stood there, arms heavy at my sides, heart pounding like a gavel. I could have yelled, I could have cried, but instead, I looked him straight in the eye and said, That's the last time you'll ever dismiss me. I turned to Isla. You don't owe me the house, but you deserve to know the truth. Then I opened my bag and handed her a flash drive, every document, every email, every voice memo they didn't want her to see. Do whatever you want with this, I said. Just don't let them decide for you. And for the first time that night, the room didn't feel like theirs anymore. It felt like mine. But the real reckoning that was still ahead. Isla clutched the flash drive like it weighed 10 pounds. Her eyes didn't leave mine as I stepped back. I'll read everything, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded. You deserve to know what they never told you. No one stopped me as I walked to the door. No guilt trip, no pleading. Just silence, the kind that comes after a truth bomb explodes in the middle of a celebration. Outside, the night air hit my face like a reset button. I exhaled. For years, I thought speaking up would make me the villain. But standing there, under the porch light that once felt like home, I realized I was never the villain. I was the evidence they wanted to bury. But now that the truth was out, I wasn't going back into silence. Back at my apartment, everything felt still. No noise, no drama, just quiet. But this wasn't retreat. It was recalibration. I poured myself tea, opened my laptop, and began writing not to them, but for myself. A blog post, a thread, a truth I was done hiding, not out of revenge, but out of clarity. I titled it When Your Family Calls It Help, but it was really theft. I didn't name names. I didn't need to, but every word was mine. Raw, real, and finally, free. I hit post, then sat back. Within minutes, messages started pouring in from strangers, old friends, even people I hadn't spoken to in years. Turns out, I wasn't the only one who'd been used, erased, and gaslit. And that realization, it was more powerful than anything they ever took from me. By morning, the post had gone viral. Thousands of strangers shared their own versions of my story. One comment stood out. I thought I was alone. That line stuck with me all day. I wasn't famous. I wasn't rich. But I had something more valuable now, clarity, and a community that saw me not as the problem, but as the proof. That afternoon, I got a message request from Isla. Coffee at Red, just us, no parents, no drama. I smiled. This wasn't about getting the house back anymore. It was about rebuilding something on my own terms, truth, boundaries, and maybe, healing. And as I got ready to meet her, I knew this wasn't the end of the story. It was just the end of me staying silent. We met at a tiny coffee shop tucked between bookstores' neutral ground. No memories tied to it. Isla was already there, fidgeting with her cup, eyes puffy but clear. "Thank you for showing me," she said. "Not just the receipts, but the strength. I didn't expect that." We talked for an hour, no yelling, no blame. Just two sisters picking through the rubble, one truth at a time. She didn't promise to give the house back, but she did promise something more important, that she'd never lie for them again. It wasn't reconciliation, it was recognition. And as I walked away, the sunlight warming my face, I realized sometimes justice doesn't look like getting it all back. Sometimes it's simply being heard. And if you've ever felt like your voice didn't matter, maybe it's time to use it anyway. I used to think speaking up would cost me everything: my family, my peace, my identity. But silence was the real thief. It took my years, my worth, my name off the deed, and nearly off my own heart. Now, I live in a different apartment, smaller, quieter, but every piece of furniture was bought with money I earned for a space that's truly mine. There's no plaque on the wall, no parade, just the quiet satisfaction of knowing I didn't let them rewrite my story. And maybe that's what healing looks like: not perfect resolution, but choosing yourself anyway. So if you've ever been the one they took for granted, the one expected to stay quiet, let me ask you this: what would your life look like if you finally spoke? Let me know I'm listening. I didn't get justice in court. I didn't get the house back. And I didn't magically fix my family. But I got my voice. And maybe that's enough to start again. Some scars never fade, not because they're ugly, but because they remind us we survived. So if you've ever felt invisible in your own family, or paid the price for being the good one, this story is yours too. You don't owe silence to people who built their comfort on your exhaustion. And maybe it's time to ask yourself, what's one truth you've buried just to keep the peace? If you feel seen by this story, type "no more silence" in the comments. And if you're ready to reclaim your story, I'll be right here, listening. Because your ending doesn't have to look like mine, but it can start the same way by speaking. This story may sound like mine, but if your heart beat faster at any point, maybe it's yours too. Because family isn't just blood, it's who respects your boundaries, honors your voice, and never makes you beg to be seen. And while I didn't get my parents back, or the house, I got something more powerful. I got myself. Now it's your turn. Drop a if you're starting over, or type "no more silence" if you've already begun. And if you're still in the middle of it, stuck, torn, scared, come back here anytime. Your story doesn't have to end in pain. Sometimes it begins with a single word enough. And if you think this is the end of mine, well, let's just say I'm only getting started. If this story cracked something open in you, good. That crack, it's where your power starts to shine through. Because being the quiet one, the helper, the good kid, it's heavy. But the moment you choose truth over tradition, something shifts. You don't owe anyone your silence just because they called it love. So take a breath. Type "my turn" if you're ready to stop apologizing for outgrowing the box they put you in. And if you're already walking that road, tell us how far you've come. You might be the reason someone else takes their first step. Because no matter how they painted your story, the pen has always been in your hand. This isn't just my ending, it's our beginning. They say healing isn't linear. I say neither is reclaiming your worth. Some days I still wonder, what if I had stayed quiet? What if I had played the good daughter a little longer? But then I remember silence didn't protect me. Speaking did. So maybe you're not here by accident. Maybe you needed to hear this, to feel less alone in the messy middle of your own story. You don't have to burn it all down, but you do have to light your own way out. If this hit close, drop A in the comments, or tell me one boundary you're ready to draw today. And if you're still holding your truth inside, just know this platform, this story, this moment, it's not just mine, it's ours now. And we're not done yet. Every story has an invisible line the moment you realize you're no longer willing to stay quiet. Mine came when they handed my home to someone else and called it love. Maybe your line is different, a conversation you've avoided, a truth you haven't faced yet, or simply saying no for the first time. Whatever it is, cross it. Because speaking your truth isn't selfish, it's survival. So, here's my challenge to you. If this resonated, type "crossing the line" below, or share the boundary you're finally brave enough to draw today. And if you're still waiting, just know strength isn't loudest in the first shout. It's strongest in every quiet step forward afterward. Because your story, it's not over. It's just beginning. After I crossed that line, things didn't magically get easier. Some days, the loneliness stung. Old habits tugged at me to pick up the phone, to apologize for things that weren't my fault, to slip quietly back into the shadows. But every day, I chose my own peace. It got a little lighter. Sometimes, setting boundaries feels like loss, but what you're really losing is a version of yourself that was never allowed to exist. So if you're still on the fence, wondering if your story is big enough or your pain valid enough, let me remind you, you are enough, just as you are. Drop A if you're building your strength, or share a moment you finally stood up for yourself. Because every story you tell, every truth you claim, gives someone else permission to do the same. And trust me, the world needs more voices like yours starting now. With every new sunrise, I realized something simple yet powerful. I wasn't the only one carrying invisible wounds. When I spoke out, others did too, some quietly, some with fire, but all with relief. Our stories connected like lights flickering on in a once dark room. I read every comment, every DM, every whispered "me too" that found its way to my inbox. And it reminded me healing isn't something you do alone. Sometimes, just knowing you're seen is enough to keep going. If you're watching this right now, you're part of that chain, whether you've spoken your truth or you're still searching for it. Drop it if you've found even a glimmer of hope here, or tag someone who needs a reminder that their voice matters. Let's build a circle so strong, no one has to stand alone again. Because the story isn't finished. It grows every time we choose ourselves. Then, just as I was settling into my new normal, my phone buzzed with an unexpected message from my dad. It wasn't a request for money or a passive-aggressive guilt trip. It was simple. Can we talk? My first instinct was to ignore it. After everything, I wasn't sure I owed him any more of my energy, but curiosity and maybe a little hope made me pause. For the first time in months, the conversation wasn't about bills, obligations, or who was right. He apologized not perfectly, but honestly. He admitted to being scared, to following what he thought was best, and to realizing too late that he'd hurt me more than he ever intended. I listened, not to forgive, but to understand. It didn't fix everything, but it cracked the door open just enough for something new. And sometimes, that's where real change begins. A few days later, we met at a quiet coffee shop neutral ground, just like when I saw Isla. Dad looked older than I remembered, as if the weight of everything we'd left unsaid finally showed on his face. We talked, not as adversaries, but as two people sifting through the wreckage. He told me about his regrets, about how he'd let fear and pride make choices for him. I shared how invisible I felt, and how exhausting it was to always be the strong one. We didn't agree on everything. Some wounds were still too fresh to close. But in that hour, honesty replaced old patterns. Instead of defending the past, we both acknowledged it and, for the first time, looked forward. Walking out, I realized forgiveness isn't a single moment. It's 1,000 small decisions to show up, speak honestly, and see each other as we are. The real work was just beginning. After that meeting with Dad, I didn't expect my world to change overnight. In fact, most things stayed the same: awkward text exchanges, holidays spent mostly apart, the quiet understanding that some things might never go back to how they were. But for the first time, I wasn't living for their approval. I poured myself into the parts of life I'd neglected: work, friends, and the tiny rituals that made me feel alive. I took on a new project at my job, a challenge that once would have scared me. I surprised myself by not only succeeding, but actually enjoying the process. I found myself laughing with coworkers after hours, saying yes to weekend plans, letting joy back in without guilt. At home, I finally redecorated my apartment. I filled it with things that felt like me: artwork from local markets, plants that needed just enough sunlight, and a wall of photos with people who'd stayed beside me through everything. For the first time in years, my space felt like a reflection of who I was becoming, not just who I'd been for my family. I also started therapy, not because I was broken, but because I wanted to understand the parts of me that still flinched at the sound of my mother's ringtone or doubted my right to happiness. Each session peeled back layers I didn't know existed: the good girl armor, the fear of rocking the boat, the urge to always fix things for others. Instead of trying to win back what I'd lost, I focused on building what I'd always deserved. I set boundaries, sometimes clumsily, but always with intention. I learned to say no without apology and yes without permission. Life wasn't perfect, but it was finally, undeniably, mine. And as the weeks turned into months, I realized healing isn't about erasing the past. It's about choosing yourself, again and again, until it finally feels natural. Months went by, and something unexpected began to happen. The distance I'd placed between myself and my family didn't feel like exile anymore. It felt like freedom. I started to see my parents and Isla not as the center of my world, but as people with their own flaws and limitations. For the first time, I let go of trying to control how they saw me. New relationships bloomed in the space I'd finally cleared. I reconnected with old friends, making time for movie nights and spontaneous road trips. I joined a local book club and found myself surrounded by people who valued honest conversation, not perfection. In their company, I didn't have to wear any masks or prove my worth. I could just show up as myself. One evening, after a lively book discussion, I realized I was actually excited to go home, not because I had to, but because it was a place that belonged to me in every sense. I started inviting friends over for cozy dinners, filling my apartment with laughter and music, watching as my chosen family grew stronger each week. Professionally, I reached milestones I once thought were out of reach. I was promoted to lead a team at work, a role that would have terrified the old me. But now, with each new responsibility, I felt a quiet confidence, the trust I'd built in myself by surviving, by speaking up, by refusing to shrink carried into every aspect of my life. Even my relationship with my parents softened, little by little. We still disagreed. There were still moments of awkwardness, times when the past threatened to resurface. But there was honesty where there used to be resentment, and boundaries where there used to be guilt. Looking back, I understood something fundamental. True healing isn't just about mending old wounds. It's about building a life where you never have to bleed for someone else's comfort again. And that realization felt like the truest kind of homecoming. One chilly Sunday afternoon, as I was repotting a stubborn fern in my living room, my phone buzzed with a message that stopped me in my tracks. It was from Isla. "Hey, can we talk? I know it's been a while, but I'd like to see you just us." My first reaction was a mix of hope and old anxiety. In the past, these messages meant more drama or another plea to play peacemaker, but something felt different this time. Maybe because I was different. We met at a park halfway between our apartments, a neutral place without memories to cloud the air. Isla looked nervous, but determined. She hugged me awkward at first, then tighter, as if afraid I'd disappear. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry," she said, voice low. "Not for what Mom and Dad did, but for believing them without ever really asking you. I know I let you down." I felt a lump in my throat. For years, I'd longed for a moment where my pain was acknowledged, not dismissed. I didn't need her to fix anything. I just needed her to see me. We sat on a bench and talked honestly for the first time in years. She told me about the pressure she'd felt to be the good daughter, too, about how she sometimes envied my independence, never realizing the cost it came with. I realized then that we were both shaped by the same old wounds, just in different ways. Neither of us was the villain. We were both survivors of a family that taught love through sacrifice, not boundaries. As the sun dipped low, Isla squeezed my hand. "I'm not asking for us to be perfect," she said, "but I'd like to start again, this time as sisters equals." And for the first time, I believed we could. After that afternoon in the park, Isla and I started meeting up every few weeks, coffee shops, farmers markets, sometimes just a quick call on our lunch breaks. There were no big promises, just a quiet commitment to try again. Each time, we showed up as ourselves, not as rivals or as people competing for scraps of approval, but as two women learning how to be sisters on their own terms. We didn't ignore the past. Instead, we let it breathe between us, sometimes heavy, sometimes lighter. When tough topics came up, we named them instead of dodging them. It was awkward, sometimes messy, but real. And real was enough. For the first time in a long while, I allowed myself to feel joy in simple things, watching Isla laugh at her own silly stories, sharing playlists, planning a trip to a place neither of us had ever been. We learned to celebrate small victories, honest conversations, an inside joke, the comfort of knowing neither of us was pretending anymore. Meanwhile, my own life kept expanding. I joined a hiking group, adopted a rescue dog, and traveled to places I'd once only dreamed about. I said yes to new friendships, new interests, and even, tentatively, to love, no longer feeling like I had to apologize for wanting happiness on my own terms. I realized that forgiveness, for both Isla and myself, wasn't about erasing pain or pretending everything was okay. It was about giving ourselves permission to move forward, carrying the lessons, but not the burdens. One evening, as I watched Isla and my friends gathered in my apartment, music playing, laughter filling the room, I felt something unfamiliar but deeply welcome. It was peace, hard-won, imperfect. But mine. It was late spring when I unexpectedly ran into my mother at the neighborhood bakery. For a split second, I considered turning around, but she saw me and offered a gentle, hesitant wave. We stood in line together, surrounded by the scent of fresh bread and sunlight spilling through the window. The small talk was awkward, how work was going, how Isla had started painting again, the weather. But when we reached the counter, my mom blurted out, "Do you have time to sit for a minute?" We found a table near the window, our pastries untouched between us. For the first time, I noticed how tired she looked. The years of unspoken tension weighed on her, too. She started, "I know I haven't made things easy. I was so focused on keeping the family together. I didn't realize what I was breaking in the process." Her voice trembled. "I wish I'd listened more to you, to Isla, even to myself. I know an apology doesn't change the past, but I want you to hear it. I'm sorry." The words landed softly, but with real weight. I told her, honestly, that I'd spent years wishing for that apology. But I also told her that what I needed now was something different: honesty, mutual respect, and no more pretending everything was okay when it wasn't. She nodded, tears in her eyes, and reached across the table. "I don't know how to start over," she admitted. Maybe we don't have to start over. I said, just start from here. We parted with a tentative hug. No grand declarations, just a quiet understanding that things could be different if we allowed them to be. As I walked home, I realized that true forgiveness isn't about forgetting. It's about freeing ourselves from the roles we outgrew and meeting each other as we are, right now. The walk home from the bakery felt lighter than any I could remember. With every step, I replayed the conversation with my mom, feeling the old ache in my chest replaced by something gentler relief. Maybe, or just the absence of that familiar tension. I didn't know what our relationship would look like going forward, but for the first time, I believed it could be built on something real. That night, as I sat on my balcony with my dog curled at my feet, I looked back on the woman I used to be, the good daughter, always hustling for approval, afraid to claim space or say no. I saw her clearly now, how hard she'd tried, how much she'd given, and how necessary it was to let her go. I realized that the hardest battles I'd fought weren't with my family, but within myself, learning to say enough, to set boundaries, to believe that my needs were just as important as anyone else's. That was the real work. And while I hadn't won in the traditional sense, I had gained the kind of victory that mattered: peace with myself. I made a promise that night, not to my family, but to me. I would keep showing up for myself, even on the hard days. I would trust my instincts, let joy in, and never again apologize for taking up space in my own story. The next morning, I woke up to sunshine streaming through my window, coffee brewing in my kitchen, and a calendar full of plans I'd chosen for myself. My life wasn't perfect. There were still awkward family dinners, old wounds that ached sometimes, and moments of doubt. But there was laughter, love, and a future I could finally call my own. And as I stood in that quiet, sunlit kitchen, I understood self-worth isn't something your family can give you or take away. It's something you claim, little by little, until one day you look around and realize you're home. The weeks that followed felt like a fresh start in more ways than one. Without the old weight of family expectations, I had space to say yes to things that once felt out of reach. I signed up for a ceramics class with a friend from work, hands messy with clay, laughter echoing through the studio as we tried and failed to make something beautiful. It didn't matter. What mattered was that I felt free. My weekends filled up with new adventures, hikes with my rescue dog, road trips with Ela, and Sunday brunches with friends who had become my chosen family. Each get-together felt like another brick in the life I was building for myself, one where joy wasn't rationed or conditional. I let myself dream about the future, not as something I needed to earn, but as something I deserved. Surprisingly, love found its way back in, too not dramatic or overwhelming, but slow and steady. I met someone kind and genuine, who respected my boundaries and cherished the parts of me I once thought were too much. We took things at our own pace, savoring the quiet moments, coffee on the balcony, late-night walks, whispered conversations that felt safe and warm. What I noticed most was how different everything felt. My friendships were deeper, my laughter more honest, and my heart finally open to being cared for, not just caring for others. I didn't feel guilty for needing support or for wanting happiness that was truly mine. As the seasons changed, I realized how much my boundaries had changed me too. They didn't wall me off. They made space for the people and experiences that truly belonged in my life. Looking ahead, I felt hope, not the desperate hope that things would go back to how they were, but a quiet, steady confidence that life could be better than I ever imagined. And for the first time, I believed I deserved every bit of it. Later that fall, we had our first real family gathering since everything changed, a casual dinner at Isla's apartment, warm with the smells of homemade food and a crackling fireplace. I was nervous at first, unsure what it would feel like to be together in this new season of our lives. As I stepped inside, I noticed how different everything was. There were still awkward pauses and half-remembered traditions, but the tension that used to fill the room had softened. Isla greeted me with a genuine smile, not the brittle kind from years before. Even my parents seemed more at ease, choosing their words carefully, letting old arguments fade instead of reigniting them. We all carried our scars, some still healing, some faded to faint reminders. But instead of hiding them, we let them be part of the conversation. Over dinner, Isla made a joke about our childhood rivalry. Mom actually laughed, tears in her eyes, and Dad nodded, acknowledging the truth in the story. No one tried to sweep things under the rug. We just let them be. In that moment, surrounded by people who once hurt me and whom I'd hurt in return, I felt an unexpected wave of gratitude, not for the pain, but for what it had made possible. Without those difficult years, I might never have learned what I needed or found the courage to ask for it. I might never have built the community of friends and loved ones who cheered for my happiness and held space for my struggles. I glanced around the table at Isla, my parents, and my friends who'd joined us a patchwork family, stitched together not by obligation but by choice. For the first time at a family dinner, I didn't feel small, or out of place, or invisible. I felt seen, respected, and whole, and as we raised our glasses to new beginnings, I realized that sometimes the family you build is just as important as the one you're born into. After that dinner, walking home beneath the city lights, I found myself smiling for no reason, just a quiet, content warmth spreading through my chest. For so long, I'd believed healing meant fixing the past or making everything right again. But now, I understood healing is accepting what's been broken and learning to love the mosaic you create from those pieces. My story didn't end with a dramatic reconciliation or a picture-perfect family portrait. There were still complicated conversations, old patterns that sometimes resurfaced, and days when I wondered if I was doing enough or loving well enough. But that no longer made me feel like a failure. It just meant I was human learning, growing, still willing to hope. Every time I chose to honor my own needs, every time I set a boundary or forgave myself for not knowing better sooner, I felt another piece of my old armor fall away. I saw my parents, Isla, and even myself with new compassion, not as villains or victims, but as people doing the best we could with what we had. My apartment became a true home, filled with laughter, friends, and little rituals that belonged to no one but me. I kept nurturing the relationships that lifted me higher and let go of the ones that kept me small. If you're still watching, maybe you're carrying your own invisible battles. Maybe you're waiting for someone to give you permission to choose yourself. Let this be it. You are allowed to change, to grow, to break cycles and build something beautiful, even if it's nothing like what you pictured. Thank you for letting me share my story. If it helped you see your own life a little differently, I hope you'll keep going one honest step at a time, because your story isn't over. In fact, it's just beginning. If this story touched you or helped you see your own journey in a new light, I'd love to hear from you. Share your thoughts, your turning point, or just let me know you're here. Drop a comment below. If you found strength in these words, give this video a like so it reaches others who might need it too. And if you want more stories about family, healing, and finding your own voice, don't forget to subscribe and join this growing community. Remember, your truth matters. Your boundaries are valid, and you are never alone in starting over. Thank you for watching, for listening, and for being brave enough to write the next chapter of your story. See you in the comments and in the next video.